Hi, I want to make a video on, which is, I don't really know what I want to make a video on. It's just this thing I have a thing of notes here, and I wrote it down a while ago, and I want to make sure I remember exactly where I'm going, but apparently I can't remember what I wanted to make a video on. But it's this idea of making this comparison between free will and determinism, and making that distinction like, your anger and having anger control and reacting to certain situations and knowing that certain situations you're kind of powerless to a certain extent. You know, the bedrock of the foundation of existence, you're kind of powerless to change those foundations and how to change the reality, and you can only change it so much. um, you can only change it to a certain extent, and you can't change the bedrock. You can only change getting to the bedrock. You can't change the foundation, and the foundation of our existence to a certain extent is the illusion that we're kind of stuck in. Even though the illusion describes the reality and the reality is an illusion, you know, the illusion equals reality, reality, and so on. It's the same thing, one in one description. The illusion is the bedrock. We're stuck in that bedrock. We're stuck in the illusion. We're stuck in the deterministic mechanism. We're stuck living the mechanism. We're stuck just doing the same old reactionary thing based on the way the mechanism works, and there's nothing we can do to change that. I'm just a reactionary machine. I can only do so much but react, and that's all I can do. Even when I think I'm not reacting, so like I see something, I'm not reacting, you're still reacting because you're still a thing reacting and taking in information. And even if you're not reacting in the sense that you understand that you're reacting, you're still having a reaction. Even if you sit here and you don't make a facial expression, you know, seeing something happen, you see something interesting or whatever you haven't seen before and you don't react, or say you're I mean, I don't know, any kind of reaction you can think of that, you know, something that you'd think you'd normally react to, you don't react. You're reacting because you're taking in information. There's a reaction happening in your brain that allows you to constantly keep interacting. There's something that's allowing you to live, and that thing that's allowing you to live is this reaction, this constant thinking. You're constantly thinking, even if you don't realize it. You're thinking, you're moving forward. There's an interaction happening, even though practically speaking, we can say that I didn't react to a certain situation. You know, describing verbally how you reacted to a certain situation, you could say you didn't react, but that's just talking more on the human level or the social interaction level based on a more practical means of describing a situation, as opposed to, you know, a shortcut in describing a situation instead of being exact with the words and the way you just and the description which you use to describe certain situations, because there's only so much you can do to make distinctions between certain concepts and words, and making those clear distinctions, and you can only do so much to make those distinctions as clear as possible, and you can only do so much to, you know, make as clear as the reaction that's actually happening no matter what, because we're caught up in the interaction, the reaction, the action that's happening, the interaction causing these reactions, you know, based on these actions, the constant action based on reaction, based on all this interaction, is something that we're caught up in no matter what. But you can say basically, I didn't move my face. I just stared. I had a 1,000-yard stare looking at something, and you could say that I didn't react because that's you had a very basal reaction, and then the reaction was just a psychological one as opposed to a physical one. So you can make the distinction that way. I had no physical reaction, but I barely had a psychological reaction. I'm making a distinction saying if you want to go and describe something as thoroughly as possible and how you reacted to a situation and making those distinctions, you can basically say, I would have had a more physical reaction if it was more interesting, but I didn't have a physical reaction. You know, I had a very minimal physical reaction because my psychological reaction wasn't as strong as it was strong enough to make it so I had a physical reaction. So you can make those kinds of distinctions and how you physically react to certain situations. And another, you know, you can make those kinds of distinctions, and recognizing how, you know, how, say, you're angry or frustrated with someone, other than, you know, say, you know, how people feel an obligation because they feel like the weight of the world is on, you know, the weight of the fate of the world is on their shoulders. They feel frustrated and they feel like they can't do anything because they're caught up in the mechanism just as much as everyone else. And like I've mentioned before, this feeling like you're putting yourself in the other people's shoes mechanism, this an idea of putting yourself in other people's shoes. That can have that can help you. There's only so much you can do. Sort of like, say you know, sort of like when you're stuck in traffic. Um, I think it's a good analogy. Sort of like you're in line and you're mad at the person, and you know really and you're mad at the line, the circumstance, but you can't put anything on that circumstance. You can only describe the circumstance so much. You can only physically react to a certain circumstance. You can only you know, not the throat of a physical circumstance so much. You can only get so angry at a circumstance because the circumstance is really intangible unless you know the thing that's causing the root circumstance. But the circumstance is the only thing describing this reality, and you know that the mechanism and everything moving and interacting in the circumstance is just based on previous interaction. So you cannot really blame, you know, saying philosophically speaking, even though we're in the world, we're in this interaction, we assign blame, and we do these things all the time because we know we're in the mechanism. We can get mad at something in the mechanism. We can put blame onto something in the mechanism. But a distinction, philosophically speaking, and recognizing how the mechanism of reality works, we know the circumstance is all that we can blame, and the things in the circumstance we can only blame so much because they're just interactions. They're just victims of the circumstance as well. And you can try to find the root cause of the circumstance, feeling like you're taking away some problem, but you can only do so much to mitigate against the circumstance, and the circumstance is something you can't really put your hands on and react in anger to. Um, you can only do so much to mitigate against the circumstance, and the circumstance is something that you can't tangibly put your hands on. The circumstance only has a beginning and an end and a causal root that caused the specific circumstance for you to begin. You could say, make the distinction that, okay, this thing is causing the circumstance. The person in the front of the line is making you react a certain way to the circumstance, and they're just doing what you can do is you can show frustration at the person at the front of the line because they're taking too long, but then again you never know their circumstance, or like putting your putting yourself in their circumstance kind of thing, knowing they're just as much of a victim of their circumstance, and you can recognize that even though they can take responsibility for their actions, and they're gonna take some responsibility for their actions because, you know, obviously we're in the world, and something in this existence is going to take some kind of responsibility, is going to be having a is going to take some kind of is going to react to some kind of reaction that they were a part of. So they're part of a circumstance, and they're going to be reacted to in a certain circumstance. So something's going to happen a certain way, and they're going to have some kind of consequence. Something's going to happen to them because they're caught up in the world, the universe. I'm caught up in the universe. I react to someone in anger, and that's the circumstance they were caught up in, even though philosophically speaking, they're just as much of a victim of their circumstance as I am. So I can only do so much to blame them, but blame is going to be put on something, because you can only put blame on the physical things in the circumstance as opposed to the circumstance. The circumstance exists, but it's something you can't put your hands on. But since I'm something physical in this universe reacting to something else physical, it's something that's going to happen a certain way no matter what. And I can only react physically to something else physical. I can't react to I can only be a part of the circumstance. I can't react to the circumstance. I can't physically react to the circumstance. You know, per se, I can't put my hands on the circumstance. I can only put my hands on something, a part of the circumstance that I'm reacting to. And so I can only do so much to put my hands on the circumstance. So the circumstance is the thing that exists. That's the blame. The circumstance is the blame, but I can't put my hands on the circumstance. But the circumstance is the thing that's making me a victim, and the other person a victim of my, say, I react in anger, and the person then becomes a victim of my anger because that's the way the circumstance happens to be. Sort of like, you know, it goes back to this example I wanted to use. The person in front of the line, or say in a line of traffic, gets blamed for the person at the front of the traffic or the circumstance. So you can't blame the circumstance, even though you want to blame the circumstance. You can only blame something that's causing the circumstance, or that's a part of the circumstance, because even the thing that caused the circumstance, it has some kind of thing that caused the circumstance to happen, sort of like this constant interaction, chaotic interaction that we can only do so much to put our hands on. We can only do so much to change the bedrock and the interactions that we're interacting in this universe. We can only do so much to change the interactions, because we're just a physical thing inside the mechanism, reacting based on the crude forces pushing us forward in interaction, or pulling us forward in this interaction. And we can only do so much to mitigate against those, or we can only do so much to control those things. But we have to realize we're just a bunch of interactions interacting with each other, and we can only do so much to put our hands on the situation and say, okay, I put my hands on the circumstance and I'm going to change the circumstance. But the circumstance will change, usually comes to someone else's detriment. So when you want to change a circumstance, it's going to cause someone else, even though you think, regardless of your intention, you feel like you're doing something good. You may be doing something bad for someone else because the reaction that they have on that has a far-reaching effect. Whatever you do has a far-reaching effect, but what you do is based on a previous interaction. So even though it's you, it's not really you. It's just the circumstances that created you. So the circumstances take the credit, even though you're the one doing in the circumstance, having the sentient experience, feeling it, and the circumstances are the things to blame, but you can't blame the circumstance. You can only blame something else in the circumstance, because the circumstance is the very interaction that's existing. So the circumstance is the thing that creates us. Our circumstantial creator is what we're reacting to. So the circumstance is the thing that the only thing we can give credit to, and the circumstance is the only thing that can be blamed. And we're just stuck blaming the wrong things, but we can't blame anything else. But since I'm in this universe, in this reality, and someone else is in this reality, we're going to react, and the consequences are going to happen based on those interactions. A person becomes a serial killer because they had a poor upbringing. Something happened to them, some negative circumstance. Some negative circumstance happened to them, and then all of a sudden they become a serial rapist or something, and they become a serial killer, and then we blame them, and we end up saying, I want that person to rot in hell forever, and I want this, even though no one should rot in hell forever, because even if everyone died horribly, I don't think a person, even if he killed everyone, that infinitely staying or forever wouldn't be worth, and that person suffering forever would be far more than all those people suffering altogether. So I think everyone being shot in the head to death is far more reasonable, every person on the planet, than one person suffering for all eternity and burning in fiery pits of flame, because that's not reasonable. So, I mean, that would be better for everyone else, and that person would be suffering for what reason? No reason whatsoever. They would actually be doing people a favor if it happened all at once, especially, because no one else would be suffering in reaction to something else bad happening, say, someone that they love. But regardless of that, a segue or that example, yeah, we're blaming the circumstance. The circumstance, we can only do so much. I have an anger reaction to something, and I can only do so much to react in a certain way. So I react with anger, but that anger doesn't do anything. The anger is just a reaction I have. So the person has no obligation to feel anything more to this anger. They have a right to do what they want. Sort of like, these rules that we have. We have rules that you say, okay, you have no right to kill. Well, you can kill if you want. You have a right to kill whenever you want, but you're not going to kill. When you kill, you just have consequences. You kill, therefore, you're going to suffer the consequences. And that's exactly what we're being controlled by, are these reactions. Um, they shouldn't suffer the consequences, but the consequences are going to happen because that's the way we are reacting. We're a bunch of pieces, especially sentient pieces, interacting and bumping into each other, and we can only do so much to mitigate against those pieces bumping into each other. So we're just reacting, and we're having these pieces bump into each other, and they're going to bump into each other one way or another, and something is going to happen, even if there's no, say, controlled law that's controlling it. Even if it's just a libertarian paradise of anarchy, it's something that's going to happen. You kill someone, they're going to come after you. This mob's going to come after you because you killed someone, and they're just going to react viscerally, based on logic, based on basic interactions, based on the mechanism that's controlling us, the crude forces that control us, and we're just small pieces in this crude force that are all intermingling together and being a victim of the circumstance. But see, the thing is, people can still be blamed, and it's all about deterrence. If a person kills, it's more about deterrence as opposed to making that person suffer. And I think even though we want the person to suffer, we realize it's about mitigating against that deterrence, or deterring against your anger or the seething hatred you have for a person. Seeing them suffer a little bit helps you mitigate against your pain that you have. So it's about deterring the whole situation. So you happen to be a victim of your circumstance. You're a serial killer, but also you're a victim of the circumstances. You're stuck in the reality where you can only take victim. The circumstance can't take the fall for it. You have to take the fall for the circumstance. You, right there, everyone that's you're a victim. Even if you're not guilty, you're a victim of the circumstance. No one's guilty. They're just a victim of their circumstance. But I think what the distinction comes down to is intention. If you intentionally killed someone, you thought it through, then we can have a little more, practical reaction to a situation like that. You thought it through. You thought it. and meditated it in your mind. I guess it's the distinction between manslaughter, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and the distinctions we make into crime and lawful reaction, and justice reactions, and how we feel like we need to um, react to certain situations, and how we properly react to certain crimes or something. And this is what it really boils down to, is crime and feeling. And it just comes down to how we interact with the environment and how we feel. You're the consequence, and we're just victims of the circumstance. And your anger that you have towards someone doesn't do anything. It's nothing more than just an interaction that we're having. So you get angry at someone. Okay, you have no obligation beyond my anger. So like I said, you could kill, but you're just going to suffer the consequences. Um, but my anger reaction is only to change. It's only an interaction that's happening, and you can react a certain way, and you're going to react a certain way, and that's going to become something that happened and part of the mechanism, and that's going to be the way something happened. So we can only change the way things are going to happen so much, from a psychological point of view, a human perspective point of view, instead of a philosophical, deterministic point of view. Um, so we can only do so much to change the mechanism that's happening to us. And we assign blame because there's only one thing to assign blame to, and those are the victims of the circumstance. Even though they may have thought it through or not thought it through, they just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. I guess that's where that cliche um, platitude comes from. Wrong place, wrong time. And you happen to be in the wrong place, the wrong time, the wrong circumstance, the wrong interaction that created you to begin with. All these previous things happening led up to your existence, and you can only do so much to blame the past and the past interactions because they've already happened. There's only so much you can do, knowing all these previous things that happened led up to you. You're just a victim of the genetic circumstance that you exist, and you're just a victim of all these other circumstances. I mean, genetic circumstances, just a bunch of other smaller circumstances that are going around in a cycle, creating your existence, and you're just going to be you're just a victim of all these different interactions. And then you have this sentient thing that's on top of it. And that's the thing that makes this thing so confusing. And so, not necessarily confusing, but so obnoxious. And we can only do so much to change the circumstance. And we're stuck being sentient based on these crude forces, this precious thing being controlled by these crude forces. And we can only do so much to control these crude forces. Oh, actually, we can't do anything because this thing is controlled by the same crude forces. It's just I'm projecting, I'm feeling, I'm interacting, I'm taking in, and I'm taking out, I'm pushing out, and I'm taking in. Sort of like I exhale carbon dioxide and I'm taking in oxygen. It's just a bunch of interaction, parasitic interaction that we can do only so much about. We can only blame the victims of the parasite or the perpetrators of the circumstance, because we know, hey, maybe they're, this cliche, my daughter was being kidnapped, so I had to kill you or bring you in or rat you out or something. I had to, ambush you, or I had to do something. They were holding my daughter hostage, so I have to become a criminal to make sure they don't, you're just a victim. You're a victim because the person that has your daughter needed money and they had to extort money from this person, but this person didn't pay up in time, so they came after you and they used you to extort the money out of someone else, and it's just the same old, it's just a long line of circumstance, a bunch of individual circumstances, and we close it off based on our individual perceptions and perspectives, and we just view it from our point of view. And we can only do so much to think outside of that selfishness, and we can only do so much to disconnect ourselves from our perceptions and our interactions. And we can only separate our selfish being from our psychological being so much, because that's what we are fundamentally. I can only feel physically I have a more intimate reaction with my feelings than I do with someone else's feelings. But I can be sympathetic, empathetic, and feel myself in another person's circumstance just as well. But that doesn't change the fundamental mechanism. It can only help you come to terms with the mechanism and make you feel more of an obligation to someone else. And the more people and more you have, the more of an obligation you have, and that becomes the detriment that you have to deal with now, as opposed to the detriment of, say, loneliness and feeling like you're being the square, you're being pushed away, or you're the odd one out taking all the responsibility. So you become there's sort of like having friends is an obligation, but you have more friends, or whatever that means, whatever you find useful in that. You have more people to come to your aid, and you're not as lonely, or whatever it may be, or you have less friends, or you want more friends, but you have less friends. Um, they come to your aid, but also you want to be lonely, but loneliness comes with all sorts of other problems as well. You want friends, but you want the right friends to your circumstance. But you're not going to necessarily find that because the circumstance is just victim, 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 and it's just the circumstance is constantly changing. Um, so, yeah. And, my anger, like, I guess what I was saying in this is, you're still going to be blamed based on the circumstance because I can only blame something as the circumstance. The circumstance controls me, sort of like being in a line. The person at the front is the one to blame, even though they're not the one to blame. But speaking practically to get the point across, the person in the front's to blame, or the person say you're waiting in a line in a convenience store, the person at the cash register is to blame, and the person, the interaction they're having, the circumstance. It's even though it's not them, it's the circumstance. The money wasn't being, caught up in the register. The register was broken because the person that in that morning didn't check the register enough or something, and it becomes that person's fault, and it's that person's fault. Oh wait, and it's no one's fault because it's just the interaction. But someone's going to take responsibility for the reaction, and it comes down to intention, practically speaking. If a person's intentionally doing this, but they intentionally do it because they're spiting someone in the line, even though you're taking responsibility for the fall. And I guess that's a good distinction. It's about deterrence, though, and that's another distinction to make. It's about deterrence against further harm, and that's where punishment comes in, and mitigating it's a problem. Sort of like you're a victim of rabies, but we're going to have to kill you because you're going to be victimizing other people if we don't decide to euthanize you. Even though you were just a victim of a dog biting you and you have rabies now, we're going to have to put you to sleep, buddy, because you're just another. I mean, you're going to cause more problems than you're worth at this point. You're useless. You're foaming at the mouth, insane, insane monster at this point, and you can only do so much. We're going to have to put you down, even though you're still thinking vaguely, and you're going to suffer, and you're suffering right now. I think, anyway, we're doing you some good, but you're just a victim of your circumstance, and we're just going to treat you like another thing. We're just going to treat you like an inanimate object, and that's really all you are. We're just going to take care of another problem, sweep it under the rug, and say that's all we can do, because that's all we can do. We can only do so much to mitigate against this experience, and that's what we are. The person at the front of the line, say practically speaking, takes the blame for the person right in front of you. Say you're fifth in line, the fourth person in line takes the blame for the thing that the first person in the line is doing. So I'm going to be yelling at, or say, I think of better ways, like you're blaming, you don't necessarily know, but say your anger is going, and the people right in front of you can deal with your anger. The person at the front can't hear you, and they don't feel like they're taking responsibility. But say the line's long enough that the first person can't hear you. It's a very specific example. The person in front of you is dealing with that anger that you're having, and then that person gets angry, and then they get, and it's a cycle. Because I happen to get angry, and then that person gets angry, and it starts with like a mob mentality. You start, one person punches one person in a bar, and then that person punches the other person, and it just becomes a big mess where people are just victims of a punch that a person started. Or sort of like guns, another problem, a political problem I guess I can bring into this. Like you shoot someone, some bad guy comes in, he shoots someone, then everyone has guns now, and you just shoot everyone, and you don't know who started the shootout, and that's just a stupid idea. And then everyone ends up dead anyway. It just becomes a slaughterhouse. It's just a bar fight. That's what life is a bar fight. Punch, 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 and everyone's punching all of a sudden. This person gets a freaking bar stool crashed against their head, and all of a sudden they're a victim of their circumstance. They punch you in the face because they were angry. They were in an argument with you before, and then they direct their anger towards you. And that person knew this person. They hate this person. They punch that person in the face, and just everyone gets involved in a bar fight, and everyone ends up getting bruised and bloody and scarred up at the end, and they're just a victim of that. And then they become hardened assholes that are just, bitter and angry because of those circumstances that befell them. So we're just victims of our constant circumstance, and we blame them. They didn't intentionally. They intentionally became an asshole, and they're intentionally being an asshole and anger and angry and whatever it is. And they're just victims of the previous circumstance, or like the serial killer analogy I used, example. victims of their circumstance, but we can only do so much. Like the rabies, we have to put you down, and we're just going to treat you like just another thing. We can only do so much. We're deter against the negative situation, so we're just going to say, you're useless now, and we're going to have to take care of you like you were nothing. So we're just going to take care of you, just like, we got to put the needle in and say goodbye, or we got to shoot you in the face. We got to take care of you one way or another, and that's what you are. You're just going to be another victim of another circumstance, and that's all we are. It's going to cause another circumstance, like a bar fight, like rabies, like the person in the front of the line taking no responsibility for the person in the back screaming it's the person in front of them, even though they're not really doing anything. They're just another person in the line, sort of like you are to the person behind you. You're just another person in the line. You're just part of the problem. You say, why is there so much traffic? All these assholes. Well, they're just another, they're a car like you're a car in the same situation. What if a person's intentionally going slow or something? Or a person's just sitting there and not moving and they're just saying, screw you, I'm just going to sit here. And then that's when we start assigning blame, even though they could be doing something completely irrational. We don't realize it. They're doing something for some reason. We don't know until the circumstances have already happened, or until we know. Sort of like you can't know the circumstances, so you can't know. You're stuck not knowing. I have to do this, but you can't know, and I have to do this bad thing, but you can't know why. But I'm just going to say it's for the better good. I have to do this thing, but you don't need to know why, and you don't know the outcome. But I can't tell you, and if you stop me, you're not going to know what's going to happen. It's sort of like being stuck in that situation. What they're doing is for the better good, but you don't know what's going to happen because they have a gun in their hand, but they can't tell you what's going to happen. They can't tell you why it's going to happen or anything about it. But if you end up stopping them, you're not going to know what they were going to prevent. And if you do end up knowing what they prevent, and it ends up, you don't know what they're going to prevent until it happens. And what we're going to end up doing is something positive, and it ends up being that kind of situation we're stuck in. We can only do so much to mitigate against the circumstances, and knowing the specific consequences and interactions of these circumstances so much. And we can only do so much. We can only do so much. We're stuck. Our sentience can only do so much. We can only perceive and feel. We're feelings, and that's all we are. We're feelings interacting with bumping into things and just having a bunch of bumps. We're feeling, we think, yeah, but thinking doesn't mean much of anything beyond coming to these conclusions, and when thinking becomes pointless beyond these conclusions, other than getting to those conclusions and reaching the logical conclusion that means something in the end. So we can only do so much to move forward and get these things done, and it's about reaching those conclusions. And if we're constantly stuck in the middle, not reaching these conclusions, then the sentient thing is pointless. If we're constantly, sort of like the mystery thing. What's the point of a mystery if you're not going to solve the mystery? If it's constant mystery, other than the mystery of knowing what you're going to eat tomorrow, but that's just the same old, I'm going to eat tomorrow to eat again and eat. The mystery is only the constant redundant mystery that you're going to keep repeating over and over again. So once you figure out the mystery, what's the point of this intelligence? All we are is a feeling interacting with these things, and the intelligence means something, but it only means something because we're feeling things interacting with these crude forces, and that's exactly the thing that this intelligence has figured out, and that's all this intelligence can do is figure these basic, concepts out, do so much with those concepts, reach a conclusion, and now the only job that this intelligence can do. That is to fix the problem, these feelings, and realizing how we can make the best of these interactions based on these sentient beings, and realize how we can change the world so much, and it doesn't even require these feelings. This intelligence doesn't require these feelings, but it's a reaction to all this reaction based on these feelings that gives us this intelligence to begin with. These interactions, these senses, this interaction with the environment. So it's just a mechanism we're caught up in, and we can only do so much to mitigate against this mechanism, and we're just kind of stuck, and we can't do anything about it, and we're just victims of the circumstance. We can't do anything. We're stuck. Yay! 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 And we're stuck. I'm angry. That's good. You're angry. That's just another circumstance. And so what? You're angry. You have no obligation to do anything because of my anger. My anger is only going to lead to a reaction you have in reaction to my anger. So I'm angry at you. You're going to react a certain way, and that's going to have a consequence, and it's going to have a consequence, and someone's going to be blamed, and this and that and the other thing, and we can only do so much to blame the circumstance, because the circumstance can't be blamed, even though it's a thing to blame, and the circumstance takes all the credit, even though, and so it can't be blamed. It can't. Circumstance can't be blamed. Can be blamed, but you can't blame it because you can't put your hands on it. The circumstance can't suffer the consequences, and the circumstance takes all the credit, even though it didn't do anything, even though it's just the circumstance that created you and allowing you to feel like you've accomplished something, even though you really haven't, and the accomplishment reaches a dead end anyway. So the circumstance is responsible for all these things that happen, and yet it's the thing that is to blame for all these circumstances, but it can't be blamed, and it takes all the credit for all the things that you feel like you've accomplished because it's a circumstance. Even your birth, your genetics, it's all just a bunch of circumstances. It's just a bunch of little atoms and pieces and protons and photons and neutrons and electrons bumping into each other, having an interaction. Same thing with me moving. Same thing with this piece of paper. It's just a bunch of pieces, a bunch of interaction, and there's nothing more than interaction. That's all we are. So the circumstance takes credit for everything. So I'm a circumstance. It takes credit, but it's also the thing that I can blame. But I can't blame it. So I have to blame the thing that's a victim of the circumstance, like I'm a victim of that circumstance. It's just a cycle of a non-ending chain of circumstance and interaction. Not non-ending, but based on an initial circumstance. Just an initial something happening. And we can go based on the distinction. We know something happened to cause this initial reaction, causing something to move forward. There was an initial reaction, sort of like there isn't nothing. We experience it on a nightly basis. We can know exactly where where this something came from is from this instantaneousness, nothingness, this experience from moving from here to here, waking up from 2 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, the instantaneousness, unless you dreamed, say. That interrupts that instantaneousness. But even then, that's a very fleeting experience, say something like dreaming. So I think that's really all. This is a long video. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, so, you're blamed, you're going to be blamed. We can only do so much. We're just victims of the deterministic mechanism on circumstance interaction. That's all we are. The circumstances, the person in front of you, your anger, the interaction, they can only do so much. You have no obligation based on my anger. I can only do so much. The distinction between, the person in line taking credit and taking the blame for the person in the front. The person in front of you is hearing the yelling, even though you may be directly yelling at the first person. They're dealing with it, but they can only, they can react to it in whatever way they want to, because they have no obligation to react a certain way, because your anger and your want of their interaction you can only get so much out of their want interaction, but you can only do so much out of their want interaction. So you want something and you show anger that you want it, but they don't have any obligation to your anger, because your anger is only going to have a reaction, and your anger is going to have a reaction reacting to it. You can't do anything but react. So you're reacting in anger, and the anger, you expect a reaction in that anger from a person. You expect some kind of reaction, but that reaction has no obligation, because the circumstance has no obligation to you. You're just a victim, and you can expect something to happen based on knowledge of how the mechanism works, but it doesn't mean it's going to work that way. So you're just another victim of circumstances, and your wants and needs you're a victim of your wants and needs too. And that's another thing. You're a victim of your wants and needs, and your wants and needs are controlling you and how you want to interact with the environment. So you're just a victim of that. Your wants, your needs, the biological mechanism making your want and need based on the circumstance again, which is all just circumstance. Cause, effect, interaction, chaotic mechanism based on our perception. So yeah, I mean, I can go on in this forever, but I guess I can really cut this down in other videos and make those distinctions finer if I want to. But I think this was a nice long video that was coherent enough. I hope I made the distinctions good enough. Yeah. Okay, anyway, yeah. So, we can only blame the circumstance, but circumstance can't be, it's the only thing to be blamed, but we can't blame it. It can't take the blame, the circumstance can't have any can't take the consequence. It's only the things in the circumstance that can take the consequence. And this consequence and circumstance are just based on these interactions. And I get mad at the person. I want to kill the person at the front. My wanting to kill them doesn't mean I'm going to kill them. And I can, sort of like laws, I can react a certain way. It doesn't mean I can't kill. It's just I'm going to suffer the consequences based on my victimization of the crude forces, making someone else a victim of the crude forces based on my interaction with the crude forces. So I'm going to react a certain way and make them suffer the consequences. So I'm just a part of this interaction that's interacting and blah, blah, I'm just interaction, blah, blah, blah. You get the point, right? I hope. I've said it enough in this video. So, yeah. So the circumstances we want to blame, they take all the credit. They're the blame, but they can't take the blame, and they take all the credit. So you do all the work, they take the credit, they take all the credit, but we take the credit. Obviously, we can make those distinctions. We take the credit, but the circumstances what created us. So philosophically, they take the credit and they take the blame. They're the ones that perpetrated the circumstance. Is the interaction of circumstances the perpetrator, and it's the one that's creating all the things that happen. But I take the I take the credit for creating or doing an accomplishment, creating something new invention, or whatever. I take that, and I become infamous or famous for some reason, and I take the consequences of those interactions. I become famous. Oh yeah, I'm great now. I did something. I take the credit for something, or I take the demise of something. I take the detriment of something. I suffer the consequences of a negative reaction. Become a victim of the circumstance. And I want to blame the circumstance, but I can't. I'm a victim of the circumstance, no matter what, regardless of what positive or negative interaction. So it's a good interaction or a bad interaction. Doesn't matter. So it's to blame, but it's also the thing that takes all the credit. Anyway, even though I'm taking all the credit, so I take all the blame. I'm in the circumstance, but that's the only thing you can take, is be a victim of the circumstance, take credit for the circumstance. If I take credit for the circumstance, for creating something new, I am blamed for the circumstance, even though the circumstance creates it, something new, takes all the credit, and takes all the blame, is responsible for all the blame. But I take all the blame, and I take all the credit. So if I take all the credit, I have to take all the blame, even though the circumstance is the one doing all the perpetrating, doing the blaming and the making, or whatever it may be. So I think that's all I want to say. Sorry for the long video, and until next time, bye.